Have you ever just stopped and wondered, how did our world get to be the way it is? You know, the borders on our maps, the global institutions we hear about on the news, even the phone in your pocket. Well, a huge part of that answer was forged in the fires of conflict. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the wars that weren't just events in a history book, they were literally the architects of our modern reality.
And that's the big idea right there. We tend to think of wars as these chapters that have a beginning and an end, but the truth is their consequences ripple out for generations. They don't just destroy things, they create new things. And the world they created, well, that's the one you and I are living in right this second.
So to really get a grip on our world, we've got to look back to the 20th century. This was a period of, well, just unprecedented, violent change. We're going to zero in on three colossal conflicts that, one after the other, completely rewrote the rules for the entire planet.
Okay, let's start with the Great War. You can almost think of it as the starting pistol for the modern era. This was the event that just shattered the old world order. And this wasn't just another war between countries, it was the total collapse of an entire way of life.
And you can see it like a string of dominoes falling. What's truly staggering is just how fast it all happened. It all kicked off with a single assassination in Sarajevo. That one political crisis spiraled into a global catastrophe. And by the time the dust finally settled, four of the world's most powerful empires, the Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, the German, and the Russian, were just gone. Literally wiped from the map.
So what did it leave behind? Well, for one, terrifying new technologies like tanks and chemical weapons, which changed how we fight forever. But maybe even more consequentially, the winners just drew new lines on the map. Think about it. The borders of the modern Middle East, those were largely cooked up in European conference rooms, creating fault lines that are still front-page news today. The peace treaties didn't really bring peace, they just planted the seeds for the next war.
And that next war, it was a whole different beast. World War II was a global fight over ideas, fascism versus democracy versus communism, and it was fought with a level of brutality the world had never, ever seen.
And you can see this terrifying progression. The rise of these totalitarian regimes led straight to global war. But the end of that war unleashed something entirely new, and frankly, even more frightening, the atomic bomb. Faced with that kind of destructive power, the world had to scramble to build a new order, a new system to try and stop this from ever happening again.
And this is where you see the war's incredible, kind of contradictory legacy. On one hand, the absolute horror of the Holocaust and the sheer devastation of the war led to things like the United Nations, an organization built for diplomacy. But on the other hand, it kicked off the nuclear age and carved the world in two, pitting the United States against the Soviet Union. And that division set the stage for our final conflict, the Cold War. Now, this wasn't a traditional war. There were no direct, massive battles between the two main players, the US and the USSR. Instead, it was a 50-year battle of ideas, of spies, of fear, and of fighting each other through other countries.
For half a century, the entire planet lived in this incredibly tense standoff. The two superpowers just kept building these massive nuclear arsenals. And in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we came this close to all-out nuclear annihilation. This whole period of constant tension really only ended when the Soviet bloc crumbled, with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 as its most famous symbol.
But we are absolutely still living with its inheritance. The nuclear threat, it didn't just disappear. The competition between the superpowers fueled bloody proxy wars from Vietnam to Afghanistan. But weirdly, it also supercharged technological innovation. Things we use every single day, the GPS in your phone, the internet you're using to watch this, a lot of that was born out of the race for military and ideological supremacy.
So, okay, why does any of this matter to you right now? Because these events aren't really in the past. They are actively shaping the world you're living in today. The echoes of these conflicts are literally all around us. I mean, just think about the difference. It's night and day. Before 1914, the world was basically run by a handful of European empires. Today, power is spread out across superpowers and alliances. Before, international law was pretty weak. Now we have bodies like the United Nations. And technology? We went from the industrial age to the nuclear and information age. That entire transformation was driven by those three wars.
So every time you turn on the news and hear about the UN Security Council debating a resolution, whether it's about climate change or a ceasefire somewhere, you are witnessing a direct legacy of World War II. The UN was built from the ashes of that war with one main goal: to prevent a third one. And every time you hear about nuclear proliferation or tensions between countries with nuclear weapons, that's a direct echo of the Cold War. That fear of mutually assured destruction that defined the era, it still casts a long, long shadow over how countries deal with each other today.
Which brings us to right now. The history we've just talked about shows us how profoundly our world can be remade. But that story isn't over, not by a long shot. We're living in the next chapter.
And here is a really sobering reminder that the age of major conflict is far from done. Right now, as we speak, more than 100 million people have been displaced by violence worldwide. 100 million. The consequences of war aren't just historical footnotes. They are a painful, present-day reality for so many.
So we have to end with this question. The wars of the 20th century built the foundations of our world, for better and for worse. The decisions that were made, the borders that were drawn, the technologies that were unleashed, we are living with all of it. So the crucial question for us is, what will the conflicts of our time build? And who gets to be the architects?